And welcome back to The Finish Line. I'm your host, Dean Cavaretta. We're here discussing the political issues of the day with Beverly political activist and former Libertarian candidate Dan Fishman. Dan, thanks for staying with us.
Good to be here again.
Wanted to turn our attention to the congressional race. That we're filming this after the congressional elections, the gubernatorial elections on Tuesday, November 4th. What's your overall impression of that race, Richard Tassé versus Seth Moulton, and the results?
So I was pretty shocked by the numbers. I tell you, having run against Richard last year, or 2 years ago, he's a strong campaigner. In 2012, the real break in the campaign, the reason he didn't win, aside from my 17,000 votes, was a split in Lynn, 21,000 votes for John Tierney, only 8,000 for Richard. When I saw his ground game in Lynn, he had recruited a bunch of local politicians who were happy to support him. I thought that was going to be it. And then Moulton beats Tierney. Now, I saw Moulton activists carrying signs that said, vote, and then they had tape over them. Because they'd printed out signs that actually had printed the date of the primary on them.
Interesting.
My take on that is they didn't think they were going to win the primary.
Yeah.
I thought they were thinking that they were going to lose the primary, Richard was going to win the general, and in 2 years they would get his. Exactly.
Run again.
But when he won, I mean, that was a huge thing. I mean, you know, that was nationwide news. And that sort of momentum vaulted him immediately. We haven't had, you know, a guy like that running in Massachusetts in a long time. And on the North Shore, that really resonated, and that galvanized the vote all over the state.
It's interesting that earned media enabled Moulton time to fundraise to get ready for the general, and Richard seemed to me had a window there to define Moulton as one of the old boy network.
Right.
Well, that didn't happen.
Even though that's exactly where most of the fundraising came from. You know, his connections through Harvard Business School, his connections from, you know, on Wall Street, which Richard talked about a little bit, but that allowed him a lot of money and, you know, the ability to be visible. But he was visible immediately by winning that campaign as well. And you look what his numbers were 3 weeks before the primary, right? I think he was polling at like 10%.
Right.
And then he just had this explosion where he caught up. Sometimes I wonder if Tierney didn't throw the race, because you think about the one ad that Tierney ran, it was almost a negative ad against himself.
Right. It was quite quizzical.
Yeah,
it was unbelievable.
Exactly. And so I wonder if that ad almost didn't cement Moulton in the place. I wonder if John Tierney had done nothing, he would have won.
Right. The other thing we noticed is that ticket splitters, people that went out and voted for Charlie Baker, Democrats, voted Baker, Moulton, and so we had that phenomenon on the left, and then on the right, Moulton seemed to attract some conservatives, some Republicans who favored his military service.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that, you know, the characterization, probably the most unfair characterization in the entire campaign, was the idea that Richard was somehow anti-veteran. That's completely ridiculous, and it's ridiculous to say that anybody who's running is. However, I drive from Beverly to Andover every day. I usually take the back roads, 97 Topsfield Road. And I saw lots of Baker and Moulton signs together.
Yeah.
And I mean, those are places, you know, Topsfield, Boxford, places where you would never expect to see a Seth
Those were
sign.
Baker Tassé strongholds in 2010.
Exactly right. And so I'm not sure exactly what happened, and I haven't seen the individual breakdowns of the numbers yet, but the way it broke was, I think, shocking to everybody. I mean, 55 to 40%.
Right. It goes to show you how independent-minded the Massachusetts voter can be.
Right.
Overall.
Well, especially because Gomez carried the 6th district in 2013, and you know that's not a small feat to do. You would think that the numbers were there. Moulton just happens to be one of those guys who sort of transcends the political apparatus. He became a larger-than-life figure, I think, for a lot of Democrats who felt like they had been anchored to John Tierney for so long, that when this breath of fresh air came in, he really revitalized them and their activism.
You know, it's interesting that the Democrats, at least here in the 6th, chose the candidate that ultimately would win. It remains to be seen if they'll do that in 2016 with their presidential nomination process. We'll see on that. Let's talk about other Massachusetts issues. Question 1 passed, which repealed the gas tax, automatic increase in the gas tax.
Yeah, I was happy to see that happen. One of the things that people didn't talk about was the unintended consequence of the gas tax. So everything else aside, if we increase the gas tax in Massachusetts every year, tie it to inflation, the gas tax increases here more than it does, the price of gas increases here more than it does in Rhode Island or in New Hampshire, right over the border. So 3 cents was the Globe estimate for this year.
People would vote with their feet and drive to the other stations.
But unfortunately, not just people. trucks,
Yeah.
FedEx,
Commerce.
UPS, right? They have giant fleets that are based in Boston right now, but there are big airports in Manchester and in Providence. They would start flying stuff in there and move those jobs out of state. Even the fishing boats that, you know, are running out of Gloucester, if gasoline, they put that tax on there, and they're filling up, you know, 250, 500 gallons at a time, it makes sense for them to go 30 miles north and fill up in Rye.
Yeah, let's turn, Dan, to Charlie Baker.
Yep.
And from your point of view, as he is the governor-elect, he's going to be doing his transition, and ultimately will start in January. How will Charlie be successful to libertarians? What would libertarians look to see from him as he begins his term, and how could he attract their support?
Well, Charlie winning is, you know, the libertarian dream, short of a libertarian get elected, where the House, the Congress is one party, and the executive is another. Because we find that that's probably the best balance.
And he did a very good job of talking about balancing the legislature and being a check and a balance.
Right. Now, the one thing that we know is that the Speaker can still pass any legislation that he wants. If the Republicans had won every race that they were running in Massachusetts, they still would not have enough votes to sustain a Charlie Baker veto. So the Speaker can still pass whatever he wants. However, there are a few gains that the Republicans did make in the House and in the Senate. And, you know, there are some people who hung on, like Leah Cole's victory here on the North Shore was, you know, inspirational. I was pleased to see that happen.
Many people, pundits, surprised that she was reelected.
Yeah, exactly. But she earned it.
Right.
I mean, she went out there. She is a candidate who
did the shoe leather.
She did the shoe leather, and she has a tremendous relationship with her electorate. And I think that that's what we're seeing more than anything else. In terms of what Charlie means for libertarians, one of the most important things is going to be, what is his stand going to be on the ever-increasing size of Massachusetts government, right? We're currently at a $34 billion budget, which is enormous. Is he going to be able to control that? Is he going to be able to cut spending? We know that there's an incredible amount of waste in Massachusetts government right now. If he were to go after that, I think Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Greens, everybody would step up and say, you know, it's time for that to happen. One of the things we talk about, Proposition 1 failing, but the roads, we know that Massachusetts is the fourth worst state in terms of efficiency of highway spending. Finding a way to make us more efficient, Charlie Baker does that, every libertarian will stand up and applaud him.
Yeah, interesting. Let's turn to other issues in the legislature. I know the issue of Common Core, the future of education reform, is something we care about. We both have an education background. You were involved in special education.
Yep, I'm a special ed teacher for 7 years.
Yeah, and I'm a U.S. history teacher for high school. And what's your view on Common Core, and is that another issue where Baker could knock it out of the park?
I certainly hope so. One of the things that bothers me the most about Common Core, I have a slightly different take on it than most people. Now, I am concerned about the dumbing down of our educational standards. If Massachusetts were its own country, we would be number 6 in the world in education.
That's a pretty good start.
Yeah, absolutely. And acknowledging that is a critical thing. And we did. The first time that Obama came to us with Race to the Top, Deval Patrick turned it down because it dumbed down Massachusetts standards. And of course, then Fox News got a hold of it. How great can this program be? If Barack's buddy Deval is not going to implement it. So they came and they made exceptions for Massachusetts.
Right.
And then Massachusetts signed on. But my concern about it, and I'll get back to the educational standard about it, is the crony capitalism of it. Pearson Education already just was involved in a huge scandal in Los Angeles where they were going to buy an iPad for every student in the Los Angeles school district, 750,000 iPads, and they were going to come preloaded with Pearson's Common Core software on them.
Yeah.
So it just came out that, as it turns out, Pearson wrote the spec. They had been talking for a year before the request was out there so that anybody could bid on it. It's crony capitalism at its worst.
It's interesting. These no big contract type of situations is what the liberals try to attack the Republicans with.
Yeah,
so here you have a situation, something generated by the liberals.
Exactly. And so
Common Core.
And so I currently write software that supports special education. If Common Core were to go through and become the law of the land, it's hugely lucrative for me personally. That is the software that I write. However, I don't want to see that happen because that's not what government's for. Government is not for creating a system where your friends...
picking winners and losers.
Exactly, where your friends get rewarded for that sort of scenario. This would be the largest computer contract in the history of the United States because they want to do standardized testing online for every student in America.
I mean, we should know, too, that many localities have a lot of problems with Common Core because of the unfunded mandate of upgrading their technology.
Yeah.
You know, what Beverly might have to spend to upgrade their technology might not be what Topsfield has to spend, and other parts of the state are in that situation.
Right. And we talk about the difference between Massachusetts and Mississippi. What we spend here, what is Mississippi, who doesn't have any money anyway, what are they going to have to spend?
You know, it's interesting. I read a stat the other day on Common Core. The Commonwealth spends $9 billion annually at the local and state level in education, yet a grant program comes along for $250 million and completely upends ed reform here in our state.
Yeah.
Going after federal money.
Right, and so there's that aspect of it, in that the money is crony capitalism at its worst. The other thing about it is that when we talk about standards, when you bring in a nationwide standard, that hurts 50% of the country that are already above that standard. And that's what it's going to be, because they actually say this in Common Core. Common Core is about the bottom half. Okay, it's about bringing them up to that level. But the existence of that standard, that lower level standard, compromises the integrity of what we have right now. They want to implement essentially the Walmart of education, an economy of scale where they can do things cheaply. But the problem is, when Walmart comes to town, the baker, the butcher, the local clothing salesman, the hardware guy, they all know they're in trouble.
Well, we also know that people and families and parents don't just want to shop at Walmart, that if their child is good at something, if they're good at a subject, they want to go further and they want to shop all over the mall and really give the best for their children educationally. Right,
exactly. And having the ability for that choice, that's a critical component to what makes our education great right now. And you know, we talk about people who are, you know, there's an awakening in the homeschool community that's been starting for a while. But we also see in the public schools, we see this amazing innovation, all the stuff that's happened in Massachusetts that the rest of the country is saying, oh yeah, they are doing it right. They're learning from us. We are taking that away when we bring a Common Core into that.
Yeah.
We're essentially saying, Massachusetts, stop innovating in education.
You know, it's very interesting. Here's an issue with Common Core where libertarians can join with union member Democratic teachers in pushing back on this. It's one of those unifying issues. The other thing that you said a moment ago that I found interesting was when you talk about crony capitalism or personal liberty, these are themes that more than one political party can rally behind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, a great example of that is we just had a huge case of crony capitalism in Massachusetts in the probation department scandal. 3 guys went to jail. The current Speaker of the House was named as an unindicted co-conspirator. I honestly believe if it hadn't been Martha Coakley, they would have gone after him more intensely. But fundamentally, the problem is that when they asked Marty Walsh what he thought about that on Boston Public Radio, he said, I don't think they did anything wrong, because government has been that way in Massachusetts for forever, where we've always said that government exists to give out patronage to the politically mighty, right? The reason they don't want to get rid of the turnpike booths is because those jobs have been given away as patronage favors to political supporters for forever. You know, you have a brother-in-law who can't do much else, get him a job on the turnpike. You know, if you're politically powerful, that's the way it's going to work.
Right.
Finding a way to remove crony capitalism is something that we can all unite on, because the purpose of government is not to take our money away and give it to the politically mighty.
Well, you know what I find interesting is the two systems of employment in this country, the public sector and the private sector, and how two different systems are forming due largely because of the public employee unions negotiating benefits that aren't around anymore in the private sector.
Right. Well, and you know, it's an interesting thing, because this is an area that I think people need to think about when they talk about opposition to unions. So there's a big difference between a private union and a public union.
Sure.
But for me, a private union is a corporation that sells labor. And I support all corporations being able to negotiate to get the best possible price for their goods. What I don't support is them engaging in uncompetitive practices. And that's what collective bargaining is.
Right.
So I absolutely support the right of people to freely assemble, First Amendment right, get together, talk about your salary. I don't think that should be illegal at all, because that's speech. However, collective bargaining, where you say you can't get a job unless you're in the union, that's not okay. That's anti-competitive.
Okay, so I'm going to try something here, Dan.
All right.
I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm going to say a U.S. political figure, a politician, and then the first thought that comes to your mind, I want you to give your response.
All right.
So I'm doing this off the cuff, so here we go. Ready?
All right.
All right. Rand Paul.
A good start.
Okay. Hillary Clinton.
Mischaracterized.
Interesting.
Yeah, I can't go one word on that.
It's very hard to talk about her with one word.
Yeah, the thing I want to say about Hillary Clinton more than anything else is that it is absolutely true that there is a misogynistic aspect to some of the attacks that happen on her. When she ran for office and they talked about how she cackled, they would never say that about a male politician.
Right.
So, I'm one of the people who believes that Hillary actually was poisoned when she was overseas. You know, she has been in the line of fire. So, everything else aside, I think that the hatred towards her, we need to dial that a little bit down. She represents a type of politics that I think is bad. She represents a large state. I'm not in favor of that. But there are a lot of people who hate Hillary for, I think we can dial down the hate.
Yeah, okay. All right, so moving along here, a couple more figures. Dr. Ben Carson.
A weird science guy. You know, when he says that he doesn't believe in evolution, I think that's incomprehensible to me. He is a doctor. You can demonstrate evolution in a Petri dish.
Yeah.
Now, you can say that I don't believe in evolution as the origin of species. That's fine. But to say you don't believe in evolution, that's dumbing down of science.
Okay, okay. Jeb Bush, former governor of Florida.
Washed up. I think that it's time. I think that when his mother said the country's had enough Bush presidents, she's right.
Ted Cruz, Texas Senator Ted Cruz.
A unique voice. You know, here we're talking about a guy with a Hispanic background standing up for a lot of liberty issues. Unfortunately, he occasionally brings in a legislative morality thing that bothers me a lot.
Okay, so let me ask you to put on your political pundit hat here for a second. Are you worried about a Ted Cruz candidacy blunting Rand Paul's chances on the anti-establishment wing of the Republican Party?
No, because I think that the two of them together, I'm in favor of...
Involve more voters, more people?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we need to show more than anything else, okay? One of my favorite Jefferson quotes is that we cannot leap to liberty. We have to advance that one step at a time. And that's absolutely true. If we have two strong liberty candidates running, that's one more than the last election.
Yeah.
Okay? And Ron Paul, I think, you know, a lot of people look back on his tapes. You know, there's a tremendous thing from the 2008 debate where he talks about the fact, he said, well, we're in a recession right now, and everybody snickers at him. And it was April 2008. He says, you guys may not know it, but Detroit knows it, right? The people who are working for a job, they know it. And sure enough, you know, 4 months later, the market fell, et cetera. And so he was right. We look at a lot of that prognostication. It wasn't actually prognostication. It was just simple facts. And liberty candidates talk about the simple facts of our economy, that we have an unsustainable model that's going on. It was one voice, and when it was one voice, they laughed at him. When it's two voices, it's going to be better.
Okay, I see your point. You're arguing that it would legitimize some of the arguments brought forth and raise the debate to a different level. Okay, last name, and then we'll move on to other issues. Governor Chris Christie. Very successful day on Tuesday as the head of the RGA. Most of the candidates that he supported won. Yeah,
I don't think that he can survive Bridgegate. I think that that's something that's going to blow up no matter what. Prior to that, I think maybe he had a shot, but you know, there's no question that he was using government for his personal retribution against mayors that didn't do what he wanted, and the evidence is there. And I think he probably won't even run. Yeah. Because he doesn't want that to blow up any bigger.
You know, I lied. I'm going to give you one more name.
All right, fair enough.
Scott Walker, re-elected governor of Wisconsin.
Scott Walker, it would not surprise me to see him get the at least run.
Yeah.
I think that he did a great job in Wisconsin. I think that, you know, he survived the recount, or he survived the recall, won again, stood up for the basic idea that public unions should not be in charge of setting what their salary is. Collective bargaining at the public union level is a terrible idea because that's the people's money. And so when we have a situation where public unions are driving the conversation about how much money they should make and who can get those jobs, that's completely wrong. And for him to stand up against that, somebody I admire that stance. I think he did a great job there. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how this field shapes up and who actually steps forward. Bringing our attention back here locally, you've been involved long enough now in the political process to know how difficult it is, how challenging it is, how time-consuming running for office is. Whether it be for local selectmen or school board or city council or Congress or U.S. Senate, what would you tell the viewers
viewers about the political process, what you've learned about the process, and how you would do future campaigns differently that you either would work on or be the candidate in.
So I have a very specific answer to this. I am currently the political facilitator for the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts.
So your role is to find potential candidates.
Yeah, and to help them run for office. And so what I learned from my thing is that the very first thing that you need to do is to be able to do the ask. The first ask is to be able to ask people for money. And as crazy as that and crass as that sounds, if you can't do that, you won't succeed at anything else.
And the argument being that you can't amplify your message.
Exactly right. And you have to find a way to be able to do that. And so what I always tell people is, if you're going to run for office, you need to be able to raise $100 in the next week. Ask your friends, anything else. If you don't make that...
Your own personal litmus test, so
exactly
to speak,
right.
Yeah.
If you don't make that, you're not going to be able to run for office. And it doesn't mean bringing $100 of your own money to the table. So that was a mistake I made. I spent $12,000 of my own money on my congressional campaign. That's a lot of money to me. I often say that I had a fool for a candidate that I was supporting when I did that.
Yeah.
The thing about it is, though, that making that ask, that's going to help you a million times over, because then the next ask I tell people to make is you have to get a campaign manager. And if you can't do that, if you can't convince somebody to support your campaign and run it, you can run a campaign, but you're never going to win.
And then actually, number 2A would be let the campaign manager do their job. Don't micromanage, right?
Exactly right. And that then, right, you get to focus on being the candidate. And that's an important thing, because being a great candidate helps a lot. Having a campaign manager who can then take care of the logistics, getting you around to places, and asking for things that the candidate shouldn't have to ask for. Like, one of the things that was very difficult for me in 2012 was I had to call up and say, hey, can I come out and visit you guys? I'm the candidate running for office. And they're like, oh, you're the candidate? It would be better if you have an organization that's working, stuff like that. I answered my own.
Divide the labor up, to spread out the work.
Exactly right. Because if you can't get the organization, then you're not going to get the neighborhood level organization that you're going to need to actually win, because you have to have supporters all over the place. If you're your only supporter, that's not it. So what we're trying to do this time around, the Libertarians, and when I became political facilitator, I made a promise to the party that I would not run for office. I would focus on supporting these guys who ran, and we had 6 candidates finished in the 20% or higher. Very proud of them. One of them did a great job in a 3-way race in Plymouth Barnstable for Theresa Murray's seat. Mm-hmm. What we have to do now is we have to convert their campaigns into real organizations that last longer than the election cycle. So we have to convert the people who showed up for them to say, here's the next step.
Yeah, so
build the party.
Along those lines, it should be noted that Leah Cole was a recruited candidate that went to a Liberty event that started getting involved in the political process.
Absolutely right. She was in Brad's Rolodex, and when he saw that there was an election happening in Peabody where there was a Democratic running against independent, he went through his Rolodex and said, who do I got? Leah Cole. She'd be a great candidate. Yeah. Fortunately for all of us, she agreed to run, put in the work, and won that election.
Right, and so she's a message to anybody that's willing to run as a first-time candidate, regardless of party, that you can get involved in the political process, be a millennial generation candidate, and be successful.
Yep, absolutely.
In Peabody, of all places.
Yeah, and her election was bigger than Peabody, because it changed the North Shore, because you saw people like James Kelcourse, who just won up in First Essex, other young candidates come along, and they're making impacts. Bob Wynot ran in Fifth Essex. Bob's 40-something. He's not that young.
Yeah.
But, all these candidates who were inspired, and you see Liberty growing on the North Shore.
It has a ripple effect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you feel that there are no parts of the state? In other words, you want to compete in all parts of the state? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that, and the Liberty movement is probably strongest in Worcester right now. There's a lot of proponents out there. Obviously, Brad Wyatt's organization, the Clubhouse for Liberty, other things, and plus it's a central location. But it should be spreading. The idea of liberty is infectious. When people are exposed to the unique ideas of liberty, they realize this is something that appeals to me that's beyond party. Liberty is not right or left. Liberty is up. And to exercise our liberty, all we have to do is stand up. And so what we're doing right now is trying to wake up the electorate. And Massachusetts, this is our heritage. The Sons of Liberty are from here. If it wasn't for Massachusetts, there would have been no revolution. Finding a way to encourage all of us to stand up for liberty, that's our mission right now.
As we wrap up with a few final minutes to go, we wanted to make sure that we told the viewers about your website, if you want to tell them what your website is, and
so
how to
we're
get more information.
Yeah, we're at www.lpmass.org. You go there, you can find out events that's happening around the thing, who your local representatives are, campaigns that are happening. You know, we're moving into the municipal cycle. If you want to run for office, we're happy to support anybody as long as you're willing to understand what the Libertarian Party stands for.
Okay, very good. So, final question. Looking ahead to the next round of elections, both in the off year 2015 and 2016, if you were to give your candidates one bit of advice looking at the current political climate, what would it be?
Figure out what the issues of liberty are that we've been out in front of all the time. We were ahead of the game on same-sex marriage. We were ahead of the game in ending the prohibition against marijuana. We're ahead of the game right now in police violence. Those things, we have to capitalize on them and say, listen, we lead the country in recognizing that liberty is something that everybody agrees on. Because when your civil rights are impinged, you want to stand up and you want to fight. Find a way to wake up that thing, wake up the Ferguson outrage.
And if I hear you correctly, Dan, I think you believe, and many that you're working with believe, that there's value in leading on an issue. That you don't necessarily have to take a poll, put your finger to the wind.
No, because if you're a liberty candidate, you should never have to apologize for your principles. You should never have to recant anything. 1994, the Defense of Marriage Act, which banned same-sex marriage, was written by the Republicans, signed by the Democrat Bill Clinton. The Liberty candidates, the Libertarian Party of the United States, came out against it immediately and said, that's not what government's about. It's not about restricting liberty. Liberty candidate never has to recant.
Yes. Well, we really appreciate your time here tonight. We've had a far-ranging interview. We appreciate your time. You've been listening to Dan Fishman, political activist from Beverly, former candidate for Congress and representative of the Libertarian Party. We want to thank you for joining us here on The Finish Line. I'm your host, Dean Cavaretta. We want to thank director Michael Gendre, film crew Tim Hezzy, Clay Evans, and we wish you a very good night.